been 16 action-packed days in office for President William Ruto. After attending the royal funeral in the United Kingdom and addressing the United Nations General Assembly in the United States, President Ruto is back home to form his government and lay down his agenda. On Tuesday, it was the proverbial catch-22, as President Ruto unveiled his list of 22 cabinet nominees. And then there was that detailed job description to distinguish the role of Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua from that of Musalia Mudavadi, whom he named as Prime Cabinet Secretary. So, where are the beacons? Our surveyors are on the ground. A joint session of the Houses of Parliament earlier today also saw President Ruto laying out his agenda, with the main focus being the economy. But did the mention of CDF draw that big cheer? For that and other reasons, Gachuri's punchline tonight will be tabled for debate on the floor of the House. Jamila's memo will be posted in the parliamentary pigeonholes addressed to each member individually. Kaikai's kicker kicks the cabinet doors open. And on my take, the Kenya Bureau of Standards can neither be vague nor opaque. All rights reserved. The news gang is here.
The sitting deputy president became the candidate of the opposition. And the leader of the opposition became the candidate of government. And as things would be, the opposition candidate won the election and became president. And the president became the leader of the opposition party. That's the beauty of our democracy. And it only happens in Kenya.
Right, so that was President William Ruto's inaugural address to the inaugural sitting, we would say, of the 13th Parliament. Well, they haven't had their first official sitting, but this was it, and this is part of the calendar of events. And, you know, what a speech that was. Linus, perhaps I can start with you in terms of, you know, the tone, the overall tone that it set, you know, laying out his agenda. It was also interesting, you know, in the sense that he did speak to the fact, the unification factor, you know, I'm the president, I will be loyal to you, I will do, you know, what the people want. What were your impressions of this speech this afternoon?
First of all, I think this is the shortest speech of the state opening of Parliament by any president in recent times. It was about 13 pages, actually 7 pages, quite short, and 47 paragraphs. The first 11 were what I would call a corner flag moment. The President, William Ruto, could not miss the opportunity to tell the politicians, this is a house of politicians, that, come on, we did it. I won the election. And there was a jab at his predecessor, former President Uhuru Kenyatta. You remember that soundbite about the opposition becoming the government and government becoming the opposition, which is something he's always actually said about that sort of dysfunctional arrangement. But he then went on to set the tone, and I think he makes it clear that the priority right now is the state of the economy. He makes it very clear that it's a big problem right there. The economy is in bad shape and needs some remedial measures, and most of this being very urgent, Yvonne.
Absolutely. Jamila, economy.
Yeah, the economy. Yeah. And we've just watched it in the story. I think maybe you should listen to the soundbite where it talks about the government should never borrow to finance recurrent expenditure, and then maybe continue from there.
Yeah.
I have instructed Treasury to work with ministries to find at least 300 billion shillings in this year's budget so that we can remove it, because the market cannot sustain the kind of borrowing we are doing as government. Next year, we will bring it further down so that by the third year, we have a recurrent budget surplus. This year alone, we budgeted to borrow 900 billion to finance both development and recurrent expenditure. You're all aware that our total collection is 2.1 trillion, which is only enough to pay debt and to pay salaries. Everything else, we have to borrow. The economic principle of equitable taxation requires that the tax burden reflects ability to pay. This is best achieved by a hierarchy that taxes wealth, then consumption, then incomes, and lastly trade, in that order of preference. I am committed and determined to ensure that our tax system is responsive to the needs of the economy. It must be equitable, efficient, and customer-friendly.
Okay, Yvonne, that's what the president said today about the fact that really we are borrowing too much and we are not able to pay it. And he made that interesting point where he said now he wants the 22 ministries in his government to find some 300 billion in their kitty, which will be slashed in efforts to manage Kenya's overdependence on debt. And I think he's given it 3 years to be able to do that. And actually, it is a good move. Any efforts to try and reduce our debt is welcome. But following what he said, maybe I'd expected maybe a bit more detail on how exactly this 300 billion is going to be slashed from the ministries in terms of now where is this money really going to come from? What are they going to slash? Are they going to slash maybe their spending on trips? Are they going to slash maybe their spending on maybe any allowances and stuff? I'd expected maybe a bit more detail on where the money is going to come from. This was almost a blanket announcement where a bit more detail was required. But again, as I said, Yvonne, it is any efforts to try and reduce our debt is welcome. Because if you look at the budget that was read this year, Yvonne, our annual budget is 3.31 trillion. And I think if he's able to actually save this amount of money, it will be able to review downwards our budget from the 3.31 to 3.01 trillion. But then, Yvonne, there are other things that the president talked about that, for me, really stood out. I know we're going to talk a bit more about the economy, is when he talks about this culture of savings. And he talked about how difficult it is for people who have worked all their lives and they keep trying to save the 200 shillings a month so that when they retire, they have something to cushion them. And the calculation, if you look at it, Yvonne, someone ends up with slightly over 70,000 shillings. And the government now is planning to sort of like kuongezea. Ukisave, tunakuongezea. And it is a good idea because, Yvonne, when you work and you've reached the retirement age and you go home, you want to go home and upumzike kidogo and work from what you saved. But the way the things are with the NSSF and what the court said about it and the fact that now all these issues have come up about whether the NSSF can actually take your money at the end of the month. If this is a move that will actually help people be able to save money and be able to have at least some cushioning at the end of their working life, then why not? Yeah.
You know, one of the interesting things that needs to happen, and I'm sure we'll hear from the president in the coming days with respect to savings is, so one of the important things is, of course, getting people to have an income. That's number one. So you can't save if you're not earning. That's first. But then there's a lot of mistrust with NSSF. And like you said, there is a court case that is there, you know, stopping the mandatory contributions. But then there's also the other thing about how the NSSF is managed. Over half of the money that they collect from Kenyans actually goes to recurrent expenditure as opposed to actually going into the savings of that. And it might be important to just completely overhaul and reform NSSF to restore the trust in that then enables people to have, you know, more contributions, or even if you want to increase some of those contributions. But I think there's also, you know, an effort to make sure that there's many other ways that people save. So, you know, how are we strengthening areas like the SACCOs, like the other independent private sector investment programs that are set out by many of, you know, the companies that are there. But NSSF, particularly being a public institution, which is mandatory for all those who are employed, at least earning a salary, that is going to be the crux of the matter. And, you know, what happens with that? But so far, NSSF has not had a good run with their monies so far.
Absolutely. And I think it's a good point to come in at. Question is, why don't people save?
Yeah.
And I would think the reason why people don't save is a multiplicity of factors. One, do they have enough to consume, meet their budgets, and leave them with something to save? If people are living hand to mouth, they barely have anything to save. So the first major task for President William Ruto and his administration is to put money back to people's pockets. Ensure that people can go out there, earn a livelihood, keep the cost of living low, such that at least a chunk of what they earn, be it in casual work, be it in investments, be it in business, at least they're left with something to save. Because ordinarily, Yvonne, everybody would want to have something to save and cushion themselves for future when they are no longer able and energetic enough to make some money. So I think the first major challenge is to ensure that people at least have something to keep in their pockets. And by and large, even when you look at especially the people who are in employment and even those who are in business, a lot of the money that they are earning is going into day-to-day expenses. I mean, for a country where a 2 kg packet of maize flour is 200 shillings, maybe for somebody who is earning a daily wage of about 400 shillings, they would really struggle to save any money. So the first major challenge is to ensure that people have something to keep in their pockets. And number two, as you say, NSSF, has it had its fair share of challenges, scandals? Yes, it has. So every time you tell people to save their money in NSSF, they have jitters around based on what they have seen in the past. So I think this is where the major challenge is. And lastly, and as we said here on Newsgang the other day, the 2022-2023 budget was made by the outgoing government or the former government of former President Uhuru Kenyatta. And it was to be implemented by the incoming government, in this case, the government of President William Ruto. So here you are with a 3.3 trillion shillings budget that has a whole budget of a deficit of about 900 billion shillings and a targeted revenue collection of 2.4 trillion shillings. This is inclusive of grants. So the first thing I suspect will happen, and most likely it will, is a supplementary budget. Because revising downwards the budget deficit means revising downwards the total amount of budget. So expect a supplementary budget. And majorly, what should really bother the government is, first of all, the cost of running government. Because it is a fact, the cost of running our governments has been very high. So reduce it. Of course, reducing it comes with some pain. Either layoffs or cutting down on certain expenditures, be it foreign travel and everything else. Basically being frugal. Is it possible to do that? Yes.
It is absolutely possible. There's another thing, and we must all remember with, the facility that we got from IMF, this was one of the big conditions, which was a fiscal consolidation, process. So taking a look at some of those state-owned enterprises, many of them not making profits, notably state universities, amongst others. There's a couple of commissions, and I think we've mentioned this on the show before, which have been allocated money but have never had, a board, have not had staff, have not actually had functions. So those are some of the areas, like you talked about, a possible freeze on hiring, which, by the way, has been in place since the previous administration, and a freeze on new projects. If you recall, President Uhuru Kenyatta before, I think it was last year, the year before, actually asked for a reassessment of all of the projects in the country with the view to saying which ones can we hold for now and which ones do we absolutely need. We were never given, the result of that assessment exercise. Might be interesting to see if that is something this new president takes over, but there are absolutely places that, that just needs to happen. There's a lot of many parastatals, but also there's a political issue with some of these things because,
what about duplication? What about duplication? How many agencies do we see that are playing a county government role, a devolved function, yet remain at the national government? So, I mean, it's time to be, put in this way, brutal, insofar as, let's say, implementation of the Constitution is concerned and the cost of running government. Those functions that are duplicated, make a decision on where they belong. Because it makes no sense to devolve a function and keep the resources back in Nairobi.
And even we're looking at also how much we're collecting, and the president mentioned that we collect about 2.3 trillion a year, and we were talking about the taxes and the collection of taxes before the show, and we're looking at the number of people actually who pay taxes. And the number has grown.
At least
payee. Yes, and that's about 5.5 million. That is from 2021. Of course, there's been a growth, steady growth from 2019 to 2024.4. But I think also you need to increase that tax base. But those people who are paying the payee are people in formal employment, who are able to pay their taxes.
And a majority of Kenyans are not in formal employment. So how are you going to be able to increase the tax base? By creating more jobs so people can be able to pay taxes. But where do these jobs come from? So I think those are some of the things that the government needs to look at, that tuongeze zile hela ambazo tunapokea kwa wananchi. Wananchi wanaotoa hizi hela ni wale ambao wanafanya kazi, tuongeze kazi, so that at least there's some form of an increase in the amount of money that the government does collect. As we said, it's not an overnight thing. These things are going to take quite a bit of time for this government, or any government that would have taken over. Absolutely. Linus?
But I think we should start with a clear recognition and appreciation of the Kenyan culture of hard work. There is no savings crisis. I think there is a bit of a problem when we paint as if there is a savings crisis. There is an earnings crisis. Like all of you are saying, you can't save what you do not have. And that's why the main problem right now is, how do we make more people, how do we put more Kenyans to the earning space? How do we put more youth to employment? How do we create avenues to earning a living? Because we really must appreciate, for example, the simple space of savings. It goes down to women groups, youth groups. You've seen all these Kenyan efforts. And I saw the president mentioning something to do with 50 by 100 plots, and calling it, you know, an alternative. People are moving there for failure to basically being able to save. I think there should be a recognition of the hard work that Kenyans put. People in Kenya work very, very hard. But what is a fact also is a lot of people in Kenya do not have access to a decent means to a living, whether formal employment or especially formal employment. Then there is the issue, and Francis, you spoke of wastage. I want to use the word that is not used. The president only used the word once when he spoke about a bottom-up approach to assisting the justice system, the judiciary, to, among other things, the judiciary, to, among other things, reduce the backlog in cases that include corruption cases. Corruption, it has been captured for the last 10 years, and the president was part of the administration for the last 10 years. He knows this issue has come up many times, that about a third of our national budget actually goes to corruption. I think the president should now start mentioning that word, mention the word corruption, because it has been proven that corruption is actually a motivation to quite a number of people running for office. They think running for office will be an avenue to making wealth, either through brokerage or even through tendering, and particularly through corruption. Politicians go into offices hoping that now I'll be the chief supplier of this and that. Some even aim to supply very expensive equipment to government. You shouldn't be surprised. There are politicians out there who hope to supply us submarines because it makes money, supplies something. And this has been feeding what we then call corruption. This administration will not succeed in avoiding that word called corruption, because it's right at the bottom of whatever goes wrong. Let's illustrate with the issue of NSSF. NSSF has a very bad name, and it has had a bad name for as long as we've been aware of it. In the 90s, NSSF in 1992, particularly during the first multi-party elections. NSSF got a bad name. There are estates, named around that time that are associated with wrong dealings that are related to political players in the government. So I think this speech and those coming up as well should have the courage to face the elephant in the room, which is corruption and the culture of corruption, especially official corruption. There is no savings crisis. There is an earnings crisis, and there is also a crisis of corruption.
Yeah, indeed. Now, one of the other things, of course, that the president also went into was trying to make good on his election promises. And we all remember the Hustler Fund that was promised 50 billion shillings every financial year, going towards those that will need it. And of course, how that'll be channeled as well. So let's listen to President William Ruto talking about the allocation of those funds every year.
The administration will allocate resources every year to the Hustler Fund, from which micro, small, and medium enterprises can access affordable credit to start and expand their businesses. I promised yesterday that we will leverage on technology in the management and disbursement of these funds. And shortly, we will be bringing to this House the legislation and the regulatory framework to operationalize this fund.
And yes, and remember, leveraging on technology, this was after the reduction of the charges on Fuliza yesterday, but also leveraging on that technology. So it is widely expected that leveraging on technology will be using that same infrastructure of Fuliza and Mshwari to be able to reach the people that need it most. But then also what's important about this, and this he said, during his campaign, is that money will be channeled through cooperatives. Because you've got to find, people in a place together. And cooperatives, have had a great history in this country, and also, providing a form of accountability, which is why, again, you see in the cabinet that was formed, there's a Ministry of Cooperatives and MSME Development, which for the first time sort of gets, its place at cabinet level. And one of the important things is about how much we know about SMEs, how much research has been done, how many are there, what are their specific challenges. Funding is just one of them, but there's many other issues like giving them access to markets, enabling them grow even beyond the borders. So some interesting thing on promises being made. Of course, that'll be a big political one for him, no, Francis? Just making sure that you deliver this very key promise.
It was one of the major driving points during the campaigns,
right,
and especially among the young, unemployed youth who were looking for a solution, an immediate solution from the incoming government. And quite a number of people who voted for President William Ruto in the presidential race was as a result of this promise of, affordable credit. But at the same time, it is important to remind everybody that there's nothing like free money. Even the money that will come, the 50 billion shillings, first of all, it must be channeled in such a way that those who borrow it will be able to make meaningful use of it, make a profit, return the investment, and grow their businesses and their investments through the money that they will have borrowed. The saving grace is that at least when they form cooperatives, they do so as people who know each other. So they'll be able to guarantee each other. And hopefully Parliament will pass the necessary regulations and laws to enable this to happen. And these are some of the issues that also are likely to draw political discussions in the House. Hopefully, at one point, members of Parliament will be able to find a bipartisan way of dealing with some of these things. But at the same time, make sure that there are watertight laws, watertight regulations, because this money that is being given out via the Hustlers Fund is also taxpayers' money. So it must be protected, it must be guarded, and ensure that there is value for that money, such that this public money, this taxpayers' money, is put into the right spaces and in the right manner, so that those who benefit from it are also able to participate and contribute to the growth of the tax base. Otherwise, it will be throwing good money
after
bad money.
Yvonne, as we're talking about promises, as we wind up, I just wanted, you mentioned it's about 16 days since the president was sworn in, and talked about how busy he was. Remember when he was elected, the next day he swore the judges. After that, he flew to the UK for the funeral of the Queen. Then he went to New York for the UN General Assembly meeting. Other than addressing the main plenary, there were other side meetings that he attended.
Yes.
And after that, he came back home. The same morning he came back home, he attended a Thanksgiving service at State House. And I think the next day we saw him flagging off relief food after meeting with some members of the Council of Governments and partners that were supporting them. And after that, we saw him meeting the cabinet. That was the President Uhuru Kenyatta's cabinet. And then a few hours later, he names his cabinet. And then after that, the next day, he meets with now that meeting about with Safaricom and KCB Bank and
NCBK governor.
Yes, meeting. And then, of course, announces these measures about Fuliza and all that. And, of course, something that Kenyans are really happy about. And then the next day, now he's opening the joint session of Parliament. And remember all that, he's been campaigning throughout until the elections, and he hasn't really rested. But I think when you're on the run to try and keep promises that you made, and people are looking up at you and expecting miracles overnight, when it's not really possible to make them come true overnight. You need to work hard every day and do as much as you can.
I mean, we're taking a break now, but I just wanted to add to something you talked about, those funds. Even as you set up another fund, funds have also not had a very good run in this country.
Absolutely.
We've had the Youth Development Fund, we've had the Women's Fund, we've had Uwezo Fund. There's also been an attempt by the government to guarantee loans for businesses, the Credit Guarantee Scheme. The uptake of that was less than half in the last financial year. And then remember, there was a proposal to put the Uwezo, Women's and Youth Development Fund into one called the Biashara Fund. We need to audit those funds, how effective they were, did they reach the people they were meant to, if not why, and how will the Hustlers Fund be different?
So we don't make the same mistakes.
Exactly. Even if you have to say that they're going through the cooperatives, that's all well and good, but so was the Youth Development Fund. Remember what they told them? Come into groups of 5, 6, and then together bring a business plan and do that. And then look at what we heard with, the Youth Development Fund. There was a huge scandal there. People were charged in court. So funds are important, yes, but, it's also important about how you manage the funds and whether they're actually reaching the people that deserve them the most and why they're not being taken up. And then today I've seen something from MP Mule, who's talking about entrenching these funds in the Constitution. He's actually seeking to amend the Constitution to entrench the funds, the National Government Affirmative Action Fund, Uwezo Fund, Youth Fund, and now the proposed Senate Oversight Fund. And he says the idea is to guarantee developmental benefits without undue interruption. So that's also another thing. If you want to entrench them in the Constitution, remember some of these are affirmative action. So what happens when, the goal is reached? Does it continue to remain in the Constitution once, the youth have been empowered and the women have been empowered? Then what? Now, once you entrench it,
when will that be?
And when will that be?
Yeah.
So just some interesting things. Yes, as we go to the break.
And I think you raise a very good point, because I think we should also be careful not to create an impression that government has all the answers. Because I don't know how private sector players are watching some of these proposals. Some are really sound, like the engagement the president yesterday had with the banks and Safaricom and the big players, and also the reference he made today to affordable credit, and also tackling the problem that he consistently raised during the campaign, where he speaks about the blacklisting of debtors by the CRB. I think it's going to be interesting how wide the scope will be, and whether everything will be fund-centered, or also you have to take certain measures to spur and introduce more players to the credit space. We all remember that in 2003, when President Kibaki came to office. And that is the government that the new administration is modeling itself on. What the Kibaki administration did was to expand access to credit. For the first time in 2003, banks started giving unsecured loans.
Yeah.
And it works so well when, you know, it's the nearest bank. It's not a particular address. It's not go to a certain fund. Because those funds, like you say, have also had a bad name. And those funds also face, you know, they really depend on how the economy will perform. You'll actually, that money will only be available if the economy is also performing. But there's something that is noteworthy. It's been only 16 days, but the one thing that the president has managed to do is to tie his plans to his election promises, almost very, very faithfully. You look at the issue that he raised today about the fertilizer, it's picking directly from the manifestos to the plan, linking the plans of the government to the promises of the manifesto. And I think that is a really major step when we talk of the nature of politics in this country, because administrations always depart immediately from what they were saying in the campaign and away. So when you look at his speech, it has this fidelity to the manifesto.
Yeah, absolutely.
Allow me to say this. Allow me. This is a word of caution. That, and Lina has alluded to it, that every solution does not lie in a fund. You realize there's almost a near tendency for everybody to want a fund. CDF, National Assembly members, want a fund. Senators want an oversight fund. The women representatives want NGAF. MCAs, they want Ward Development Fund. Yes, funds can be good, but at the same time, let's not make it look like everybody deserves a fund so that they are able to do their work. And I think this is also mirrored on the caution that the Supreme Court gave in that verdict on the CDF issue. I think it is also important to remain true to the functions assigned to each office. If you have a function to execute, implement, then implement. If your work is to oversight. Otherwise, there will be a duplication of roles where everybody at the very, very lower level will want a fund. And it will become difficult to manage these funds because most of them also have a tendency to be used to seek re-election. This is the money I was given. This is what I did with it. So I think it is important to be cautious that, yes, solve problems, but a solution does not lie in giving everybody a fund.
And
we can as well give you an anchor's fund.
I would like that. I'm sitting with my bosses right here. I hope Imawafikia. Let's take that break now.
A gang fund.
A gang fund. Why not? Yeah, let's take that break while we discuss that anchor's fund. I really like that, Shuri. Let's take that break right now. We'll be right back. This is News Gang.